Welcome to another episode of the Stillman Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Battisto. Today's guest, we have Rick McKinney. Rick McKinney has been a staple of Central Valley Wrestling, as well as being a referee at the state level. Very excited to have him on the show. We're going to be talking about new high school rules that are happening nationally, as well as specifically in California. Just trying to get some feedback, really, as just a coach and as a fan of the sport. What are his maybe possible interpretations of the rules? What does he think about them? And then also just general refereeing questions that I feel like I've had, and maybe just kind of using this as an opportunity to talk about them. And then also, this was recorded Tuesday. Monday night had some big news in the larger national wrestling landscape with David Taylor being announced as the next head coach for Oklahoma State. So we're going to talk about that as well. Hope you guys enjoy the show. And again, thank you guys for following and enjoy the conversation. There we go. All right, guys, it's on. So first, I'm just excited to have you on, Rick. I want to hear your perspective just about rules. And then, I think what I am maybe a little bit unsure of, like the process to making the rules, and you can kind of just correct me if I'm wrong, but when we want to do new rules at the high school level, I know there's like a national committee. And then those rules, when they get approved, they have to be approved again by the state, right?
Yeah,
Is that part of the
basically,
process?
basically the process has to do with there's a form, and I believe it's on the NFHS website, and every state has a rules representative. In our state, it's Dwayne Morgan, and so any rule change proposals have to be submitted on that form. And certainly, there's a lot of conversation that takes place prior to that. And then it needs to be submitted to Dwayne prior to March 1st. And then Dwayne is the one that takes it to the NFHS Rules Committee. And then that's where it's discussed and decided on. And Dwayne does a great job, especially when it comes to um, giving a commonsensical approach or response to you when you come to him with a potential rule change. I mean, he'll flat tell you, hey, with the committee that we have right now, it's not going to go. Like the rule change, the inbounds, one point of contact now, it's taken us a long time to get California and the high school in general, it's taken us a long time to get to that point because especially at the high school level, safety is always going to be the number one, and they've tried to extend the out of bounds by allowing the near fall and falls to take place out of bounds, but they kept everybody close by saying no. Uh, Both knees have to be under the offensive wrestler, but now they've realized that extending it to one supporting point in bounds and given the already safety parameters of the 5 foot boundary mats, doesn't jeopardize a wrestler's safety, like as if like they anticipated. So that's one of the probably the biggest rule change that's going into the upcoming season.
How strict are the referees going to be when it comes to that 5 foot like mat in terms of mats being in contact with each other? Because I was talking actually just to Daniel McCune on my way home from practice, and he talks about how he runs his tournament. Like they don't do a true 5 feet, because we're talking about length of tournaments. He wants to get as many mats in there as possible to make sure it's happens as quickly as possible. Hopefully I didn't just out him right now on how he runs his tournaments, but so I feel like that's a legitimate question. Is the mat space outside of the circle, especially with that 1 point of contact in bounds? Is that going to be something that? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, and first of all, thanks for having me here. This is always great to see you guys, and it's always fun to have a conversation about wrestling that no one's really being held accountable to a certain degree, and
we're going to hold you to accountability,
well,
Rick.
you have, I know,
We're going to hold you to accountability at these tournaments. Remember on that Simple Man Wrestling podcast when you said this?
Yeah, you guys can deny it, but I can't. I get it. I get it. But the season, if it's the official high school season, coaches and schools are really bound by that 5-foot rule. My responsibility as the head official in a tournament, when I get there, whether it's a dual meet or a tournament, is to evaluate, is the score table 10 feet away? Are there 5-foot parameter mats around? Where are the participants in the coaches' chairs? So I have to look for the legality of that based on the NFHS rules. When you get into these preseason tournaments and postseason tournaments, it doesn't really affect freestyle and Greco, but there's so many collegiate organizations now and tournament run organizations where they get away with that. And I mean, can it be challenged in court? Well, what can't, right? But it really comes down to the time of the year in which these tournaments are being held, who's hosting these tournaments, and then who are they using for officials. If they're using like the CSOA, my association, officials, but it's not in season, well, then they have the flexibility to do that. My officials have the flexibility to officiate these tournaments if they want to or not. But during the high school season, varsity tournaments especially, you are not going to find whether that 5-foot safety mat is not in place.
And again, I think that's going to come down to the coaches actually running that tournament. Whatever host site, I'm sure that we want to be able to put in 6 mats to get the process or the speed of the tournament going. But if you can only fit 5 mats with that space, then that's got to be on the coach and that's got to be on the host site. Safety, like you said, that somebody was going to get, put in court. Well, if it's going to take that for the safety for these tournaments to be run properly, that's something that we got to look at as a state or an association for the referees.
Well, therein lies the rub, because you've got on one side you've got the wrestling mentality or the wrestling coach mentality of one, I've got to make money. In order to make money, I've got to bring in as many wrestlers as I can. And if I'm going to bring in as many wrestlers as I can, then I have to have the number of mats that's going to make this not go back to the 70s, early 70s, when I was wrestling at 2:00 in the morning as an 8th grader. Tournaments just went that long because you had that number of participants, but you didn't have a lot of mats. And so the other challenge is for the tournament director, the tournament host, to go, okay, who do I want officiating? Well, if I'm going to pay for guys that do state tournaments or varsity level tournaments, Temecula, the Dock, or the Bakersfield tournament, or any of these tournaments, then those guys are going to want to be paid more regardless of the time of season that is taking place. So then a tournament host will say, well, let me just get my high school kids to officiate it. They know wrestling. And now you've got a tremendous potential lawsuit and certain of these safety issues that take place. All of us know the days where they took a 40-foot mat and they divided it into 4 squares. So you had 20 by 20 or 10 by 10 rather squares and you're blowing whistles and guys are all over the place. So that's always those are always the challenges that that are on that side of the whistle. On this side of the whistle, I'll take, okay, guys, we've got mat to mat, no boundaries. You know, you're a first year official. This is great mat time for you. Great practice for you to get in there. And so I'll send my younger guys to those tournaments, and if not myself, a couple of my other varsity guys to oversee what's going on. But it's also putting them at risk because, you know, again, should somebody get hurt, you know, but it's wrestling. So back to our blue collar days, you know, it didn't matter. Put them in there. It's a scrimmage. We don't care. Let them wrestle 10 times. You know, who cares if it's a 90-pounder and a 3-pounder? Just let them wrestle. This kid's tough. You know, and so you really have to fight those thoughts when hosting a tournament. And sometimes they're successful, you know, at arguing with themselves, and sometimes they're not.
So Rick, being an official, say you do have some situations where you may not quite have the 5 feet. Being an official, when they get to certain parts of that mat where you know there's less, you can always push them to center, right? Work to center, work to center. Remember in University of Pacific, we had those mats that were pushed up in that corner when you came out the tunnel, the far right. I mean, we lost some matches there because we didn't have any room to sprawl out of bounds. I remember that one far right mat was difficult, you know.
Well, and 100, yeah, I remember those days. And at that time, officials were going, okay, this is the mat area. Here's where you get to score.
Yeah.
And I know the bleachers are right there, but I'm gonna let you wrestle. Now, what we'll do when we run into a situation like that is let the wrestlers know and let the coaches know, hey, listen, we're going to call an early whistle. Mm-hmm. We have to, and it's probably going to take somebody away from scoring, but it's the safety of the wrestler first. Now, by rule, we should say, no, move the mat. You can't use it. But again, in the nature of what we're all trying to accomplish, we find ways to compromise, and we blow that early whistle, or and the same happens with score tables. So you've got a 5-foot perimeter, but you've got the score table there. So now take into the 1 point of contact rule that's coming into place, and you've got 6'2", 215 pounders. A toes in is gonna put them into the stands. But I'm happy about the rule. I'm glad it's there. And like any new rule change, the challenge is going to be how quickly and how well officials adapt to it. Because with any new rule change, and one of the rationales I was reading said it was going to make it easier for officials. Well, it will for some, that especially those that don't want to call or that call an early out of bounds. I always tell my guys and anyone that'll listen, you got a 38, 40-foot circle there. Give them 40 feet to wrestle. Just because they're on the edge, don't blow the whistle. There's so much scoring that takes place, and then you take the free-for-all philosophy that a lot of parents and spectators have. In what I've seen is only the sport of wrestling. They feel they have a right to be on the mat, standing on the mat, walking on the mat, and right where all the wrestling is taking place. And so enforcing that becomes difficult because you're selling coaches bands for $20, and everybody and their sister can get a coaches band. And they all feel they have the right and the expertise to be out there. But yeah, in those situations, I'm going to call an early whistle, make more attempts to stay out in the center, and then you just react to what's happening in front of you.
Now, assuming that all the mats are 5 feet, I think it's the biggest impactful rule change coming in. Obviously, I think we'll get to the 3-pointer and we'll get to the 4-pointer, but the impact of I kind of side with those people, Rick, where it's going to make it easier. Okay, is it one supporting point now? It's literally a pinky or a shoe. If that's in bounds, then hey, action continues, call the fall, let's go.
Right.
I do think it'll make it easier on that. But I do think it's the most impactful rule change because now you're telling a kid, hey, you got to wrestle no matter where you're at. And if they're in bounds and you're out of bounds, you can't slough off. I mean, I remember in the olden days, it was like, all right, get off the mat, get off the mat. Whatever coach had their hot word for, hey, play the edge, look where you're at, get out of bounds, get a fresh start. Now you got to wrestle no matter where you're at, what position, even in the top position, hey, I can score. In the neutral position, hey, I got to defend those legs towards that edge. And even in the bottom position, hey, I got to keep fighting. Otherwise, this guy's going to score some points.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think what I like most about it is it's preparing high school wrestlers for college. You know, one of the arguments that Dan Gable made for years was that, you know, the United States being one of the few, if not the only country in the world that has collegiate wrestling, and yet the big stage is international, you know, world championships and the Olympics. And to his point, we were doing our wrestlers a grave injustice by having collegiate wrestling here because it wasn't preparing them for the world stage. And I think you saw a lot of rule changes to kind of work toward that. And I think the same is happening now with these rule changes. We're preparing these kids to wrestle in college, and again, being I'll say old, not just former, but being an old coach, you know, that wrestle till you hear a whistle is now come to fruition, and there's nowhere to run. You have got to wrestle. And then when you add the rule of taking that 10-foot circle out, you know, you're basically saying you got 40 feet to wrestle. And so I'm excited about it.
See, what's funny, Rick, is I agree with you. You want to stay consistent with college, right? Because as a fan, they're confused. Oh, that's 2, now it's 3. I mean, the difference. I mean, even watching the NCAAs, I caught myself several times. That's 2, right? No, it's 3 now, right? So it's getting in that thing, but being consistent is really important for high school and kids to prepare them, and especially for the fan. It gets very confusing. I think the one rule, we'll talk about the other rule changes. I think the one rule change going to writing time in high school would be very difficult, being that
100%.
If I could go back,
time trying to keep score.
Yeah, I mean, so that's like the issue too, especially when we have like home duels that like I will make sure I go over there and I put the kids that I trust and I make sure I make them practice and I make sure I do it right, especially in matches where I know like I don't want us to lose momentum because high school sports across the board, no matter what sport, it's all about momentum and messing up on the clock or messing up the score. Score you can fix, but messing up the clock, like all that stuff, I mean, it's just a momentum killer. But I think where was I going to go with this? I think the riding time, if I could go back and be in high school and have riding time, I would love that. But I think to Al, your point, like having riding time in high school would just make it so much more difficult, I think, for kids to be able to track it. But I think it fits. I think it fits with the other rule changes to an extent.
Oh, 100%. Because if you look at the rule changes, what are we promoting? Wrestling, scoring, action. Now, you add riding time at the high school level, you're contradicting yourself. We're saying, okay, listen, it isn't important to be working for all these points. Just stay there and ride. Now, it isn't to say that the skill of riding and riding in and of itself isn't important because it's about control. But if you look at what we're trying to promote by giving 2 near fall, 3 near fall, and 4 near fall, and a 3 takedown, and all these rules that we're going, hey, and a one point of support, we're saying wrestle, make this exciting, go back. And so to add riding time would just contradict everything that we're trying to do.
I think
So, Rick,
now go ahead, Al.
Oh, I was going to say, Rick, do you think with these rule changes with the 2, 3, and 4 and 3 near fall, will that impact the 15-point near fall?
The
Now
tech,
you can get there quicker.
the tech.
Well,
The tech fall.
I mean, technically you obviously you can, but what you have to remember is in order to score the near fall, regardless of whether it's 2 for 2 seconds, 3 for 3, 4 for 4, you have to hold him in that position, and to score, the bottom wrestler's got to come to a defensive position. They can still only earn a 2-point near fall in an entire round and still control them on top. But if they're going to give themselves an opportunity for the 2, 3, and 4, then it's going to cause them to continue to wrestle, continue to work toward that. And if you got a top wrestler that's doing that, yeah, that 15-pointer could happen within one round, technically.
I think my argument that I have maybe towards just the changing of the rules in general, it's like we want to do it to promote scoring, and I totally agree with that, and I understand that concept. But I think regardless of how much a takedown is worth or how much near fall is worth, I think it's on us as coaches, and I think it's on the wrestlers as athletes. You need to wrestle a style where you're going to go out and score points. Like, we need to encourage that regardless of how much it's worth. Like 100%. No one wants to come to our dual meets if you're not trying to score takedowns. You're probably not going to beat good kids. Not probably. You aren't going to beat good kids if you're not going to get a takedown or find a way to score on them. So trying to promote that scoring, especially at the high school level, that's what's going to help you if you have these goals of wrestling in college. Regardless of how much near fall is worth or how much a takedown is worth, you got to go out and score points.
I think the most important thing for this rule change that came in was it had to be paired. If you're going to go to a 3-point takedown, it's difficult for me as a coach or a former wrestler or someone now who's commentating. It's difficult for me to understand that a takedown's more than near fall. Our ultimate goal is to put that kid on the back and get the fall. So being able to get a 3-point takedown yet only have a 2-point near fall, I think that they did it right by pairing the 3-point takedown and adding that additional near fall. It's difficult to say that putting somebody on their back for a longer period of time is equivalent. In the olden days, obviously 5 seconds, you're getting 3 points and they're still getting a takedown to match that near fall criteria. I'm very happy that they paired the 3 with the 4.
Well, you're sending a couple different messages, or you're sending two messages to each wrestler. One is you're promoting the aggression and the action to get that 3-point takedown. So now you're up 3 points. But then to your point, Brian, is you're also telling his opponent, okay, listen, you're down by 3, but you choose top and you turn them for 2. Now you're down by 1. You turn them with something else for 3. Now you're up by 2. So again, to your point, they've looked at both sides of the action, the offensive and the defensive, or each of the wrestlers, and are giving them opportunity. And again, it all promotes action. All of it promotes action. Stalling is still going to be a strategy. It's still going to be important. It's still going to be important for officials to recognize it better. But again, with these rule changes, the only rule change that hasn't happened yet, and I have been asking for it for a long time, is
here comes the juice.
Is taking that danger rule that applies at college and applying it to high school. Our high school rules, even with the changes, have still not caught up to the wrestling. Wrestlers are better. They're better than they've ever been, technically and athletically. And the fact that we can still allow a high school wrestler to get in and do the Abbas roll and then just sit there knowing he can't get out or she can't get out. They are stuck there because of what the action that their opponent has done. And here's how it started. So you started with, we're all attacking, right? You're leg attacking. And then the Abbas roll comes in. And it's called a variety of things, but I'm going to give credit where I think credit's due to those guys. And the whole idea behind the Abbas roll was to counter the leg attack. And then the offensive wrestler says, okay, I'm going to counter your counter by holding you there. And the other wrestler is going, all right, now I'm not just going to Abbas roll for the purpose of stopping your leg attack. I'm going to do it for the purpose of scoring. So now you ended up with what they call spaghetti wrestling or scrambling, whatever it is. And you've got this, and now the guy that took the original shot is now countering the Abbas roll and has figured out how to half with his leg, hold him in danger, and the wrestler can't go anywhere. And but we're giving credit to the defensive wrestler in essence that is just sitting on that in criteria, getting pinned, but he knows he can sit, but they still won't change it.
So, Rick, let's go back to that match with Mejia and the kid from Selma in the finals at state. Remember, It was that situation. If that was college rules, would the Selma kid won? He would have scored there, right?
Well, he would have either scored or at least would have had an opportunity to score, because now the onus is on would have been on the other kid, but Mejia to get out of it.
Yeah.
But
it makes the wrestler think twice to hit that. Okay, if I'm going to be able to hit that to counter it, I better be able to get my back out of exposure to actually continue the action instead of wait there for a stalemate call. So yeah, that's a rule that would be phenomenal. I would be all for it. I don't know, obviously, Brian, you being the only true high school coach here in the podcast, like, are you okay with that? Would you be okay with that rule coming in, with that danger in any position?
So one of the things that we spend actually a good amount of time on is not necessarily an Abbas roll, but we call it a crunch position, or like a body cradle, where we go, whether it's from a head inside or a head outside, we go elbow behind their knee, and then we lock across their chest, and then our other elbows kind of near their armpit. And we got in that situation, actually. You're not supposed to do this, but from bottom, one of our kids should have just kept kicking out, but instead he turned and wrestled back in, and the guy was more or less kind of in a low single position, and we got to that crunch position and rolled him through. Well, the referee at first is like, wait, he's on bottom.
He's on bottom.
His back.
Yeah.
But the other kid is like, we established that we have an arm. We have our knees pinching the other guy's arm together. We have elbow deep at the knee, and then we're squeezing tight. And like the other kid can't get off his back. So that's criteria now, in my opinion, for reversal and then now near fall. Sorry, I'm do this.
And
I'm
you're
in freestyle mode right now. But
I'm sorry.
But with back point, or with just danger? For that sequence for danger, it wouldn't technically be danger because he's on bottom, right? It's not in a neutral position. But I think just expanding on that, because personally, like, we teach that position and it's still so new. Like, I competed a year ago, and I got in that position, and it took like however long. Like, I have this guy on his back right now. Like, I feel like, I don't know, I've established, it's just because it's different, and I think it's just going to take, like you said, I think time for refs to see it and be able to apply for it, for that rule to be effective. And I think whenever there's any kind of rule changes, whether it's the danger count or the rules that are establishing, I think officially this year, right? It's like, that's just going to take time for people to figure out.
Well, and again, to my point earlier, I mean, look what you're teaching and coaching. You're teaching and coaching technique, and that continues to move wrestling in that direction, but the rules aren't moving in that direction. we haven't caught up with all
Yeah.
of the creativity that's come out of this. And
Well, it's a college thing, right? It's like I'm doing college, like a college skill or a college technique, but at high school, it's like I think it works actually better in terms of being able to create the scoring action, but it's not necessarily being called yet because it's still newer on a high school level.
well, and I'll be the first. There are too many rules in college wrestling, for officials. I just think it's a little convoluted at this point. There's so many rules at the college level, and what I hate to hear, and I hear this every time I have this conversation, is, oh, that'll be too difficult a call for an official to make. I go, well, then why are they officiating at that level?
100%.
I mean,
These guys are solid, Rick.
we have to grow with it. But so force us to be as uncomfortable as the kids are being and the coaches are being. Challenge us just as any wrestler and team and coach is being challenged to come up with an answer, a technique to beat anybody. And so, yeah, I've just been a starch advocate of that, but it just falls on deaf ears. But we got these new rules in place, so in a matter of time, we hopefully we'll get that in place too.
So just for complete clarification, like these rules are 100% a go, all of them for this upcoming season: 3-point takedown, 4-point near fall, and 1 point of contact in bounds.
Yeah, and then of course with the near fall, you can add points onto that for technical violations, grabbing the headgear, bleeding on the part of the defensive wrestler, something illegal on the part of the defensive wrestler. The only thing that is not for sure yet is on the 1 point of contact, if they're going to apply the cylinder aspect of it. Yeah. Not everyone that sits on the NFHS rules committee is necessarily an expert at wrestling. There are administrators that have been assigned positions. And so you it's like any other committee, you get people that know what they're talking about. You got those that are less educated in what they're being asked to vote on. And so one comment I was told was, I don't even think they know what a cylinder is.
They didn't pass third grade math or whatever.
Yeah, geometry.
It's the vertical airspace that they're not grasping.
Yeah. And then and I think too, I don't anticipate the cylinder being applied. Not that I have any inside information, because I don't, but just using the argument of not applying the danger rule that officials can't, that's going to confuse them. I think then they're going to think about those same officials, and they are going to go, well, I don't know, where the cylinder boundaries are, and it was a toe here, was it there when it happened? So my guess is that they're not going to ask that they do that. That it's going to have to be a supporting point, meaning it's being supported and on the mat. That's my guess.
So, Rick, I got a question for you. So we're talking about rule changes. When it comes to potential dangerous between middle school, high school, then college, it seems like college, for example, a guy throws a figure four in, got a power half, the guy in the bottom stands up. They immediately call it in high school. As he's coming up college, they let it go. I don't see those two gaps closing just because of maturity. What's your thought on that?
No, I agree 100%. Because again, it's always going to default to safety.
Yeah.
At those levels. I mean, it's really, really, really difficult to get penalized for a slam at the college level.
Yeah.
And so many things are not illegal, but they're going to be at the high school level and below. So, that I don't see that gap narrowing at all.
No. I try to explain to parents that there's a maturity, there's awareness on the mat. Guys in college a little bit more aware, whereas high school kids, their awareness is far less, especially in the younger kids.
And I've actually
the injury.
And I've actually seen it change depending on the quality of the tournament and the quality of the wrestlers on the mat. Okay, something that might be potentially dangerous, with a lower level wrestler changes depending on your tournament. Obviously, let's take the most prestigious probably in California besides the state Doc B. Well, if you got two solid wrestlers going and they're wrestling in position, I see the referees actually take a little bit more of a step back and let that action happen. Do you see that on the referee side, Rick, or even on the coaching side, Brian?
Go ahead, Rick.
Well, on the referee side, one of the things that I train my guys to look for is the level of aggressiveness and physicality on the part of each of the wrestlers, because especially even at the high school level, at the lower levels, but certainly in middle school and elementary school, you have those kids that are winning national titles at 8 years old, right? So they've got that aggressiveness, that intensity, and that coaching and that athleticism and that experience. But then they get that kid that's like this, and they keep backing up, and they don't have any real concept of what they're doing. And so, for example, the standing lock behind with the arm trap. Well, that's potentially dangerous, right? Well, even at the high school level, you can have a situation where you've got an extremely aggressive, strong wrestler and a very inexperienced, weak one. In order to protect that inexperienced wrestler, an official might be more inclined to stop that match on their feet. And they're certainly probably going to do it at the elementary level, just to prevent that injury. But and to your point, Brian, the spatial awareness and the athleticism and the discipline of those elite level wrestlers, when you go, you have the high school nationals, say in Virginia Beach, those are college rules that they apply. Now those kids haven't wrestled with the college rules and college out of bound rules, but they allow them to do it back there because, again, of their ability to wrestle at that level and within the context of those rules. So, it really just, the officials have to be able to recognize what's going on in front of them in order to make those kind of decisions. Like every time a wrestler gets picked up, whether the arm is trapped or not, the first thing I'm doing is yelling easy, just to remind them, hey, you're responsible to bring those guys down. I don't care what the situation is. It's your responsibility to do that. So there's things that we can do as an official, either in a pre-match talk or certainly within the match itself, that's going to limit those potential injuries.
Yeah, I see. I've seen when that rule in terms of the trapped arm and rear standing, like when it first got implemented, I think there were some refs that maybe weren't able to get the hang of it quick enough, which we were maybe on the receiving end where we had a kid get mat returned and right on that shoulder and end up jacking up his shoulder. But again, at the same time, it's like, I understand being hard on referees from that perspective, especially as a coach, but also at the same time, you have to give people grace, as hard as it is, especially when that's your guy out there that just got hurt and you care about him. But, people are learning too, as long as it's not malicious, which most of the time it's not. And I think in a maybe talking about in different settings too, like with the younger kids, yeah, just always err on the side of caution. I think with older kids that are maybe wrestling at a higher level, maybe with that specific rule with the rear standing with the arm trapped, making sure you're being safe. But I think most positions, when it's potentially dangerous at a high level, I trust refs to use their best judgment. If a kid's potentially going to get injured there, stop it. But also just kind of letting them wrestle through it, especially if it's kind of like a rubber knee situation where they got that shin whizzer and they're draping over the top of the head. Like, if you know who this kid is and you've seen him wrestle before, you know that they do that. Like, let them wrestle a little bit, you know. And I think most refs, most good refs do that, especially in the state finals. I've seen it, but yeah, definitely on that. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Brian.
Yeah, you're good.
One of the other aspects of high school officiating that's closer to college officiating is we now have an autonomy to have a greater vocabulary within the match. If you listen to college officials, they're talking to these guys almost constantly in situations, and a lot of that's preventative. They're letting them know, like a leg line example where the bottom wrestler stands up. Well, it's like, the official saying improve. Well, that really, you had center, action, and contact were the only three things that officials were for years allowed to say. But now we can say other things. We can say, keep it legal, watch the throat, off the fingers, stay on the mat. So having the ability to have not really a conversation, but more of a just a broader vocabulary is allowing us to let that kind of wrestling and that level of wrestling and that level of aggressiveness and intensity and we to let it continue, because we get to tell them, hey, off the throat. Before you couldn't say that. Oh, you're coaching. Well, I am. I'm coaching your kid not to lose the position he's gained, and at the same time, letting him know that the safety of the action is important as well.
I didn't even realize that was a part of roughing. It's like you're limited to what speech you can use when you're in the circle with a whistle. Like college guys will legit like talk to you, like, hey, like you do that again, like I'm gonna get you, or like just even little things like that. But on the high school level, you have a limited vocabulary and things that you can say.
By rule, and this is what's interesting too. Yeah, by rule, there's three words that we should only say: contact, center, and action. But again, that dialogue has expanded to where I'll bring them back after a wrestler's done some illegal or unnecessary roughness type technique. I'll bring them back and I go, you do that again, all right, it's not only going to cost you 2 points, it's going to cost you the match. And I'll say things like, you don't get points for doing that, you give them away, knock it off. And so, because again, we don't want to penalize and take kids out of position or take them out of their wrestling or take them out of what they've been coached to do, but we still have a responsibility to make sure that the match stays in control and no one's intentionally hurt. We there's rules to say that we can say that was unnecessary roughness, but I can't tell if it was malicious or not because I don't know what the guy was, or intentional. I didn't mean to do it. One of the greatest football commercials I ever saw was an official going, "You got a personal foul," and then the football player comes in from the side and he whispers something, and then he leaves, and the official goes, "Never mind, he didn't mean it." We don't get to do that.
So Rick, do you remember Fred Ambrose, NCAs? Remember the guy who was very theatrical?
Oh, yeah.
That guy was the art of theatrics and talking. I mean, he pretty much controlled that entire mat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was hard to watch wrestling. It was hard to watch wrestling. You just wanted to watch him.
Yeah, it was just body mechanics, right?
Yeah.
Rick, I got a question for you. And I think Brian has an opinion on this. I think we talked about it.
Brian has an opinion?
Ooh, careful. Hey, wait. I got a loaded question coming up for you next. But yeah, let's talk about spiking the headgear.
Spiking the headgear. What are your personal thoughts on it? Should that be
on what?
It's spike it, like I win the match, I'm taking my headgear off, I'm spiking it down.
State finals champion.
I don't understand. You know, the two biggest enemies of an official are ignorance and arrogance. And sadly, some have both. Most of the officials, and certainly most of the officials, if not, I'd say 95% of the officials that even do the state tournament, this doesn't apply to. But any new official coming in, and again, they're either ignorant of the rules or they're arrogant to the level that they're not, you can't approach them. You can't, they think they're right, whether they are or not. And then you hear phrases like, you've got the rule, then you've got the spirit of the rule. Well, and you know, when you make it, when an official makes that statement, they really set themselves up for argument. But it's one of those hidden truths. So you got a kid that wins the state championship that slams his headgear, and you're going to penalize him? Are you kidding me? You don't do that. You just don't do that. And the wrestler that loses, that demonstrates that type of action, you're kind of forced to call them on that, because every one of us is all of us are being watched. All these wrestlers are being watched by all these young kids that are coming up, by all of these parents that feel empowered. So there's a level of discipline that has to be demonstrated and maintained. I think there's a massive difference between slamming your headgear because you lost and slamming your headgear because you won. You know, you're not throwing it at somebody's face. I mean, you know, I just beat you, and now I'm going to beat you with my headgear. That you just got a strong sense of emotion that most wrestlers don't demonstrate until it's over. I used to tell my guys all the time, take the emotion out of what we're doing. Football is a really emotional type of a sport. Wrestling, if you make a decision on emotion, it's probably going to be the wrong one. You know, so you take the emotion out. When you win or lose, that's when the emotion's going to come out. Then you just have to decide how you're going to use it. You know, are you going to act like you've been there? Are you going to be humble in your actions, or are you going to be, you know, an idiot?
I love the term. I love the term that you use. Yeah, but you use the word malicious. You know, if you're doing it with intent of, you know, anger or hatred or whatever, yeah, call it. But if you're celebrating and you're a state champ, you know, one division state champ, might want to throw that one in there.
And we all know, we.
That was for Al.
I know,
brother. I like the one division. I love it, but it's unique.
And we all know what goes into being a wrestler, and we all know what goes into being a medalist or qualifier, a medalist, and certainly a champion. Man, if you don't have some level of release or some sense of the opportunity to release them, I don't care if it's taking your singlet and pushing it out, or pointing, or if you slammed your headgear. I mean, they do flips. They spike balls. I mean, why can't these guys have a little bit more of a celebration if it's within the context of the humility that comes with being a wrestler? I saw that. I mean, how many times that happened in the state tournament this year? I think
only one where the head coach caught it. I mean, bonus points for DC. Didn't he catch it on the slam and came back straight up in the air and he caught it?
Yeah. So
you'd mentioned that everybody's watching, and that was my big question that I really kind of wanted to ask you is on the referee side. Now with so many of these matches being streamed, whether it's on Track or Flow or whatever it is, and having the ability to go back, do you as a referee appreciate the video and able to go back and critique yourself? Or is that something that you guys as an officiating crew are now more aware of like, hey, the camera's on. Are we going to, I don't know. I mean, I guess my question is with the camera now being more available and the matches being able to be seen, mistakes or positivity being called, do you use that as a tool to teach new referees? And do you go back and critique yourself?
Yes to everything you just asked. It's an extremely valuable tool, um, and I don't think it's used enough in a macro sense. I think, when we have our Zoom meetings, our state official Zoom meetings, there isn't enough. Let's look at this. Look at these tough calls. Look at these situations. Allowing everyone other than the two officials involved in the match to have an opinion or to comment or suggest or ask. It's as important a tool to any official as watching video is to a wrestler and a coach. The challenge with it, with a less experienced official, is ignoring it and just focusing on the action that's in front of you. Probably the best example I can give is you'll have a situation and the clock is ticking, and it's a kind of a scramble situation that has stalled, and there's just sitting there. And then you've got the official that hears, he's watched this situation for 10-12 seconds, and then he hears 3, 2, 1, and then he throws points up. Well, it's the pressure of that clock that's influencing the call that they just made. I've been an assistant in situations just like that at the section championships or the state championships, where I've gone up to the official and my first question is, what changed? That situation didn't move for 12 seconds, and you didn't call anything until it was 1 or 2 seconds left. What changed? Well, nothing changed. So they take the call back. Well, what influenced that was the outside noise. And in this case, it was that clock, it was that timer, it was the tapper. And so the same can happen with video is you can have, and I think other than the logistics of, I mean, how do you implement video review at the high school level?
I don't think you can.
You can't make it fair and equitable. But, Livingston High School is not going to have a video review. Clovis High will. But to make it fair and equitable, it's just I don't see that ever happening in the near future. But I'm not opposed for a trial where instead of they go through this, they go through the mechanics of walking over here and talking to this coach, and walking over here and talking to this coach, and walking over here and talking to this coach, and then they don't make a decision because they leave it up to the official again. But then they'll go in the back room and they'll watch the video and go, yeah, that was the wrong call. Well,
yeah, because you got some yahoo like me on the other side on the mic saying, well, dude, he blew that. How'd he miss that? Like, he's still out of bounds or whatever.
Yeah. So,
and that happened, I think, I want to say in the state finals. I can't remember for what match, but I think it was, I don't want to, again, call anybody out, but I will. But the referee, it was his last match refereeing. Yeah. And it was a little bit of a controversy with the takedown. And, there were some coaches that we know that were right there, and he was talking to the referees like, what do you guys think? And they pulled up the video on the phone and we're looking at it. It's like, but why can't we just do that in the match and make sure the call gets correct? And it might not change. It might be the same call, that at least it's like we
Well,
don't we can just do it real quick and have that conversation.
But we really can't. I'm from the production side of that. Yeah, we can pull it up on our phone once it's archived, but unless you're locally recording to that computer via that. Now we do it. We do it at the college level. We do it at some of the bigger levels where we're able to go and have a separate monitor and go back and pull for the coach's challenge. We do that often. It's very simple to do, but are you going to be able to have, if you're going to be able to do that, you have to have that at every match from no matter freshman all the way up. And some of these tournaments that aren't running things with streaming, you don't have that option. I think that would be very difficult for a coach to say, hey, listen, we're going to do a video review for this because we have the technology on this tournament, but not on that tournament. I'm not sure how the...
Well, wasn't there conversations about doing that in the postseason at like the Valley, the Masters, the state level, being able to have that kind of review? Or that
I don't know. I don't know of any of that conversation. I mean, maybe Rick, you would know more up there in the central section.
Yeah, I haven't been a part of that conversation, nor have I heard it. But I think it would take we've got 10 sections in California. It would take a section commitment to at least pilot that, and spend the money and create the resources in which to make that happen. I don't know that schools have that revenue to do it themselves, and I'm not sure that that's something an entire section would take on either.
Well, let's just do this. I'll bust out my superior Android phone, and I'll just set it up. And then if Rick, if you make a bad call, I'll just be like, no, look at my phone. It says it on here. And then that way we don't have to worry about it.
Well, yeah, I know,
bro.
Yeah.
Well, Rick, I know a lot of the tournaments that we're both at, obviously, whether it's the Zinkin or, Doc B or at, Battle for the Belt or even at the state. We hear that a lot now from referees that kind of come up to us and I was like, hey, listen, can we pull that back up? Or they'll pull it back up on their phone. What do you think of this call? And I'm like, well, I'm just some poor schlop on the mic on the other side making the call. But I do see that increase of the accountability aspect, and not necessarily on a negative connotation, but hey, did I screw that call up? Let me go back and look. Hey, you know what? Hey, let's get this guy's opinion. Hey, Joe, what do you think? Well, yeah, definitely that could have been potentially dangerous, or no, that's not too. Or in the state finals call, hey, go back and talk to your assistant. Did he get the position? Yeah. Did he get the takedown? Did something change? Yeah. Position changed. The hips rose. Boom. There's your 2 takedown, match over. I think video has upped the game for the referees as well as the coaching. But now I think I'm a little biased because I do a lot of that stuff, but having video and the access to train your wrestlers in those positions as well as the referees in those positions, I think it's been a great addition across the United States. Well,
and I have I want to say good fortune of being a head official in our area and certainly within our section. I really have the good fortune of people coming to me and saying, Rick, will you watch this? And per rule, I don't watch it in order to make any kind of a decision because it's just not allowed. But I do tell them, I want to see it. Send it to me. Show me. Tournament's over, or I'm in a position where I can look at it. And my philosophy is, hey, listen. And I don't care who the official is. I don't owe anyone anything but the truth. And I tell my officials that all the time. I say, hey, listen, yeah, we've been friends. Yeah, you've been loyal. Yeah, you've been dedicated. Yeah, you step up every time I need you. But don't think for 1 second that I'm not going to tell you that not only did you miss this call, here's how and why you missed it. And of course, I always start with, tell me why you made this call. Tell me what you saw here. Because that perspective, when you're out there blowing a whistle, is always going to be different from the corners, from the stands, from the table. I always tell everybody, parents, fans, coaches, what they see goes from their eyes to their heart. What an official sees has to go from their eyes to their brain, because we aren't supposed to care who wins. And we don't have to be right. The call does. So if you got to change it, change the call. But to learn, you have to understand why you called it and what it is that you saw. So I get to look at, and I offer and open myself up to watching all these videos and having them sent to me, so I can take it right back to my officials and say, okay, let's talk about what you saw. Let's talk about what the interpretation should be, and how you should have called it, because that's the only way you get better.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. And I feel like whenever I interact with you at tournaments and even at some of the youth ones, I feel like whenever I get an opportunity, whether it's yourself or just officials in general, especially after a match, like, I feel like I try to be as respectful as possible, because I understand it is a difficult and thankless job to be a referee, especially on the high school level. But, I think those communications where it's between, coach and ref, I think are important. And especially it's like, if you can do it in a way where I'm going to benefit because maybe, I didn't quite understand the rule, or maybe a referee is going to benefit because, they get to kind of share their side to it or their perspective to it, in a way where maybe we can come to some kind of understanding, or it's like, or maybe we don't, and kind of leave it at that. But I think, having you on and being able to kind of share your perspective on with the new rules, and even with, just how to conduct yourself as a referee, and just what's happening with wrestling. I think it's awesome. So
I appreciate that. And I try to tell, when I have the chance, I try to tell coaches, because they'll say, what should I have asked? I try to tell them, here's the questions you need to be asking in this situation. If you go up to the table and you're ranting, number one, I tell my officials, ask them, Coach, what's your question? Right? And
what's your interpretation of the call?
Yeah, and so coaches, here's how you can get the official to answer your question. And if you have an official that comes back at you and says, hey, it's my judgment, then they have no idea why they made the call. And now the arrogance comes in, and they hide behind the rule. Because if they don't have the words to describe why they did it and why they made that call, then perhaps they don't know, and they should listen even further, to what the coach has to say.
That is such an underrated comment right there. It really is. Yeah. It's so underrated that as an official, you sitting here on a podcast saying that certain officials are blinded by their own, whatever word and terminology we're going to use, but they're afraid to make the call, or their ego gets in the way. Like, just change the call or have the facts behind the call.
We don't have to be right. The call does. When I first started officiating, and I just was reminded, I've been officiating for 17 years now, I'm going, geez, where's the time go? But when I first started officiating, actually going into officiating, I hated officials as a coach. I had a tremendous disdain for officials, because I dealt with, and I read that rule book all the time. Now, I'm not in any way saying I was always right, if ever, but I did. There was such an adversarial relationship between coaches and officials when I first started officiating, that became kind of a goal of mine, is to eliminate that. So I mean, I remember, I won't say who it is, but when I first started officiating in another association, I walked in, and they said, well, Coach McKinney, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I retired from coaching. I'm an officiate. And so someone says, well, so you decided to join the dark side, huh? And I said, no, I just figured it's about time one of you guys knew the rules.
And this is in Bakersfield, huh?
And nobody laughed. Nobody laughed.
Because it was true.
And yeah, and so The very first thing I implemented when I got into a position where I had a voice and could make some changes is allowing coaches to ask a question from the corner. Because by rule, if a coach has a question, they've got to go to the head table, call timeout, and then the official by rule is obligated to either change the call or give them that warning for misconduct. And it doesn't matter if they're questioning judgment or the misapplication of a rule. The penalty is the same, and that I still don't understand. But to prevent that scenario, I said to every one of my officials, I said, if a coach has a question, they get to ask it from the corner. Was that a takedown? No, coach, he stepped out. Okay, we're done. We get to keep wrestling. The action keeps going. As a coach, no, coach, he stepped out. Wait a minute. Now they come to the table because they disagree in the statement that they stepped out. Well, now you have a conversation, and then at that point that you've answered the coach's question, you're allowing action to continue with an understanding to both the wrestler and the coach as to why you made the call and took place, and not to delay anything. But then they being the coach, still wants to call timeout and go to the table. Well, now you're forced. Now as an official, you're kind of forced to go, okay, coach, this is, again, what I saw, and this is why I called it. I hear you, but I'm not going to change my call like I gave to you earlier. So now you give the misconduct. But that approachability, that professionalism, that positive environment just has made all the difference in the world, certainly in the central section, I believe. Now, granted, I get ridiculed by the upper echelons of California for doing that, because at the state tournament, we're not supposed to, and it's one of those things, when in Rome. But I'm going, what's wrong with it? What is wrong with answering a coach's question? And I'm not talking about the guttural responses that, again, I try to train my guys to ignore. He's stalling. That's two. That's all guttural stuff. I mean, that's not intended to get the official's attention. That's just what comes out of us in the corner. We got a wrestler and we're trying to win a match for them and help them. You just ignore that stuff. It's when the comments are directly at the official, and you begin to attack him personally. It would be like official turn around going, Coach, where the hell did you learn that technique? That wouldn't work on any level. Where did you wrestle? I can't believe you still have a coaching title. So if you turned it around and the official was doing that, and I say that a little tongue in cheek because we're held to a higher standard. And I tell the guys too, I said, keep the focus on them. Don't pull it on yourself. And it's their job to ask a question. It's okay. It's not personal. They're doing what their job is, to protect and defend and help their athletes. So take it as you're doing their job, they're doing theirs.
Hey, Brian, you ready to talk about the breaking news?
Yeah, I think I feel like we got to. And Rick,
well, I'm sad because
are you super involved with like what's happening in college right now? Because news was dropped like a bomb last night.
Hey, I got just a heads up. I got to bounce in like 6 minutes. I got to take my kid, and we're having a fun little time tonight. But yeah, go ahead, Bri.
Well, so obviously, last night we're some of the guys on the podcast and coaches and stuff. We're in a little group chat, and Sean O'Rourke said some obscenity, saying that David Taylor was hired as the head coach, and I thought at the time I was like, yeah, no, I watched Christian Piles and FRL either that morning or the day before say it's unlikely, and that was the inside scoop. It's not going to happen, and something changed. Coleman Scott was, I guess, supposed to have a meeting with the AD like that afternoon or something like that, and it just got pushed back. And I guess the scoop is
the tweet got deleted too.
What did?
The message. Coleman was going to go have his meeting with the AD.
Yeah,
and
I think
it was
said
up.
that.
And then it got deleted, and it was like, what's going on? Like, Coleman's the guy. Esposito's out, Coleman's in, he's taking over for Smith, and then blank check, baby.
So I think there's not maybe too much in terms of like timeline that I could add that's other people haven't covered yet, but just generally, so that part happened. Coleman Scott came in, they had a pretty good year. And then I think what kind of opened the door to some extent was, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys have heard something different, the CMU job had opened. And I think Casey Cunningham maybe had entertained it, or they had reached out to him to maybe talk about it or something like that. And I'm not sure if maybe that in any way had influenced, okay, maybe Casey Cunningham is a candidate. Possibly that might look to leave, which I think if you look at that whole staff there, that nucleus, that big three, I think they're very loyal to each other and have been for a long time. And I think they both kind of established that they are going to be there for a long time, especially with what happened recently with OSU. But I think when the administration had opened up that Oklahoma State job, I think they obviously Coleman Scott's the number one candidate, but I think they wanted to open up just to see what else is out there. And I think Casey Cunningham was somebody that they were going to look to try to get. And I don't know what happened. And I think maybe David Taylor just wanted to throw his hat into the ring and, kind of just talk about it. And I think their initial offer for not just his pay, but also what was maybe going to be included in terms of salaries for assistant coaches, what kind of support they're going to be able to have for the program. And that initial offer, I guess he said no. And then they ran it back. I guess they came back with a bigger offer. And I think it was Willie Saylor and Justin, is it Bosch is how you say his last name maybe? They have their own podcast called Bosch Mania. And I guess the word on the street is that second offer, like, you would have been stupid to refuse. Like, they made him a mafia offer, an offer he cannot refuse. He said yes.
The one thing that I want to point out before I head out is, like, I think we all have the utmost respect for Shane Sparks, and his comments were so amazingly, it hit home to me of, hey, if there's one dude out there, if there's one guy that can challenge Cale and Penn State, it's David Taylor. Like, he's got not only the cred, he's got the technique, he's got the connections. It's a big day. Getting Taylor to such a prestigious school at Oklahoma State to replace Smith, it's a monster. It really is, and I just look forward to seeing his assistant coaching staff. Is it Dake? Is it Nolf? Like all those guys. I'm super excited, boys.
So, Brian, if you look at the history, Taylor's the 7th head coach since 1916. Ed Gallagher was the first. And Joe C. was the first outsider of a non-Oklahoma State guy to get it back in 80. I think it was 85 to 91 when Tommy Chesbro, he replaced him. So Taylor's the second outsider. But you got to look at the big picture, too, is that when Taylor didn't make the Olympic team, I'm sure that opened up the door of, maybe we got to look. If you look at the history of Oklahoma State, you're talking, but they've won 34 championships, the last being in 2006. I mean, they've had 53 conference titles, almost 500 NCAA All-Americans. You got, and 60-something guys made the Olympic team. So they got a rich history here. And I'm thinking they're looking big picture when they saw him. It's like, okay, we need to shock this and bring this guy in, because one, I don't think they have an OTC, right? I don't think they have Olympic level club.
Oh, a regional training center?
Yeah, I think they do. It's Cowboy RTC. I know Christian
Do they?
Carroll,
Okay.
I think, was wrestling for it, and a few other guys. And I think Coleman Scott might have been one of the first guys, maybe, to when it was I don't know. Never mind. I'm not gonna say on things I don't know at a super high level. But I think so. For one, I think Coleman Scott, I think initially as a candidate, kind of to your point, Al, is he's not an outsider, but he's been to the outside. Like, he's been at other programs. Like, he was at UNC and had a fresh perspective. He was working alongside a Hawkeye, and then being able to build something together, I thought was pretty cool. And why I think him hiring is, I think, for one, he's an alumni or alumnus, and I think he has the understanding of what it takes to win at a high level at OSU. And I think also he's got the coaching chops for it. And I think he knows his skill set. And he has an outside perspective. I think what hurt Oklahoma State, is you kind of get put into this bubble where there's no maybe fresh perspective that comes in. And I think Coleman would have brought that fresh perspective. And I think he did this last year. I think my personal opinion, and I enjoyed talking to Daniel McKeown. I talked to him a little bit because I was going to talk, about the rules. And I was talking about, Oklahoma State and David Taylor. From my perspective, is I say we'll see. I think initially, I think there is a shock, right? Especially because he's a big personality, not a big personality, but he's a big name. He has, big popularity within the wrestling community. He's an Olympic champion. He has the credentials, both in college, in high school, and at the international level. But I just feel like he's still a little bit unproven coaching, period. And I think he's a little bit, he's definitely unproven coaching at the collegiate level. That's
some heat. Boys, I'm going to be rude. My apologies, Rick. It's always so good to see you.
Well,
Brian, thanks for having me. Al, guys, have a phenomenal night.
All right, you too, buddy.
So, Brian, I was going to say, you look at Coleman Scott, he's had 15 All-Americans at UNC. He had Austin O'Connor win it. So, yeah, he was building some. I think their best finish was top 20, I believe, a few years ago. But you look at David Taylor, he's got the gift of the gab. He's a business sense type guy. I mean, he started, what's the club? He started the youth program, M2.
M2.
And yeah. I think, I think they're building a new facility for a wrestling room at Oklahoma State. I just think they're looking at 20 years ahead. This is a once in a lifetime pick, bro.
Well, yeah. And you got to, we have to remind ourselves that this is a business, right? Yep. And it's the business of winning, because winning not just brings championships, it brings money, it brings community, it brings all of that. If you look back at when John Smith first became the head coach there, he was a year away from getting fired, because he was trying to coach the way he wrestled. Mm-hmm. I mean, he expected everyone to shoot low singles. And he recruited that way, and their placing at the NC2As, it kept doing this, and whenever you have the message that resonates, well, this is how we've always done it. Mm-hmm. Well, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. I mean, if you go historically back, there's a certain philosophy, and this is the way we always do it. Well, you can have success in that to a point. Mm-hmm. But what David Taylor brings in, other than his own accolade, he's going to bring people in away from Penn. He'll bring, there will be those that follow him. There will be money that will come in with and it's going to be a perspective outside of historically all the great things that Coleman Scott has done. But I think part of it, at least from me, is that Coleman Scott still represents kind of an old OSU in a sense, or a traditional OSU. And David Taylor doesn't he represents the new winning and that Penn State is now had over so many years.
I think what's interesting about Penn State too, is if you look at the people that have graduated, there's only, I think, a handful of coaches or a handful of people that have wrestled for Cale that have moved on to other places and have coached. People that I think off the top of my head is Mark Hall. I think of Brian Pearsall. Both of those guys are at Penn. I can't really think of anybody else, maybe off the top of my head. Maybe I'm forgetting. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple people. But I think what they do a great job of is retaining people. Like if you look at like Jake Varner, what's Jake Varner doing right now? He's coaching their RTC. You look at, Bo Nickel, what's he doing right now? Well, he has a American Top Team facility in the same acreage, same piece of land that M2 is on, and he's coaching RTC guys. And I feel like there's got to be other guys that I'm missing out here. I think what kind of tying into what you said, Rick, what's great about David Taylor coming in is he represents this change in wrestling. And I think this is where OSU has struggled, is if you look at where Penn State is successful, what is their style? Their style is innovation. Their style is focusing on process instead of results, which I'm not saying that Oklahoma doesn't, but I think that that's where they shine, is being very process driven, being very organized in the process, celebrating the process. We hear all the time how much fun they have in the room. I think that's a little bit more mirage than I think maybe factual to an extent. But I think what's great about him going to OSU is he has that fresh perspective. And I think he's more willing to be innovative. I think where you talked about the history of OSU, especially with John Smith, I think that first year he was coaching, he was also competing. And it was the year when Josie had gotten fired and he kind of gets thrust into this spot. And they almost got the death penalty and they weren't allowed to compete in the postseason for a year. So they legitimately redshirted everybody they could, including Pat Smith. And a couple guys lost a year. And they did absolutely terrible. And then that next year, they were able to have, I think, maybe 1 or 2 years where they won a national title. But then we saw this decline. And I think a lot of it had to do with the evolution of wrestling. And I think it took some fresh perspectives and people coming in that maybe allowed them to be able to have some success, like these guys that were a little bit more, I don't want to say homegrown, but maybe had a relationship with Smith because of camps or otherwise, like the Esposito group and the Perry group that had a lot of not Perry. Man, I'm trying to think, who did Perry beat? That was upset. Dang, I'm blanking. Why am I blanking? I can't think of his name. You know what I'm talking about? 65-pounder, big upset, big guy. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Oh, he was a UFC fighter, Hendricks.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Johnny Hendricks.
Oh, Johnny Hendricks.
Gosh, I can't believe I forgot that.
Getting older, bro.
But with that group, right? They won, was it 2 in a row, 3 in a row, national titles? And I think what maybe has kind of hurt
4 to
John
6.
Smith. Yeah. What's hurt, I think John Smith and Oklahoma State, since that point is maybe to some extent their unwillingness maybe to adapt to the college landscape. And I think with NIL and transfer portal, John Smith is very openly like, I hate that stuff. I don't want to do it. And I think, when they had AJ Ferrari there and they had a lot of team points, I think what they got maybe fourth that year with AJ Ferrari winning it. And then after that, they kind of fell off a cliff, and I think Coleman Scott coming in and being a little bit more open to transfer portal, like they got Olenek, they got that kid from Rutgers that was pretty tough. And, maybe open themselves out. Yeah, opening themselves up a little bit. I mean, they had a pretty good team. And that honestly, I mean, they could have gotten a team trophy this last year. I think they were good enough to do that. But, again, it's like we look at these situations in wrestling where on the one hand, I think it's important to maintain some element of tradition. But on the other hand, we have to think about what's good for wrestling. And I don't know. David Taylor's hire. I don't know if it's I hope it's going to be good for wrestling, but we'll see.
Brian, we all assumed that, when I asked a question, we left UNC for Oklahoma. I'm like, well, why did he leave? He was a head coach. He was doing well. Why would he leave? We don't know the whole what's behind. Why did he leave? Was there something going on at UNC? I mean, there's a lot of questions we don't know, because if he came to Oklahoma State and there was no real contract beyond just being an assistant, why would you do that, right? There may be more to it that we don't know. That's a big risk, because now where's he going to go? I mean, so it's
if it was his decision, then you can't help but feel for the guy, because he leaves a head coaching position with the assumption that he's going to become the head coach. He certainly has the history, the tradition, and then to have that drop out of the sky again, if it was his decision. We only know what people want us to know. It's like walking into somebody's house and seeing a beautiful family picture, but you have no idea whether everybody gets along or not. And I think there's a little bit of that. And again, it's a business, and wrestling isn't a blue collar sport anymore. It's a white collar sport where there's thousands and millions of dollars are being spent certainly at the college level. But families are, they're taking their kids all across the country. They're going into camps that are $1,400 for a week, all under the pretense of getting them that scholarship into that program that's going to make them a national champion and set them up. And again, with Nil, the opportunity to do that's even greater. So, the best wrestlers don't always make the best coaches.
That's right.
Not often.
Yeah.
I mean, he's proven himself on the map, but and it's not that he has big shoes to fill. He just has a big position to fill.
Mhm.
But he's a smart guy. I think he's going to use the people that are already in place. And then he's certainly going to bring in his own and they're gonna support him. They're gonna give him every reason to succeed.
Yeah.
In hopes
I
that
mean,
they made the right decision.
I think to your point too, I think David Taylor was kind of one of those kids where, their family had some money. So when they had an opportunity to move, I can't remember if it was Wyoming or Utah, when they had an opportunity to move from Wyoming to Ohio to go wrestle at St. Paris Graham High School, they did it, and it's not necessarily, I don't think, a knock on David Taylor as a person. I think,
No.
From everything we hear, I think, he is a good person. But I think when we talk about, want to add to the privilege element, and I think it sets maybe, I don't know, I think this is something maybe worth talking about, set maybe like a precedence where it's like, oh, look at him. Like if we just send him to all these camps and we put him in all these different places and we can just up and move and leave schools, like that's going to put them in a better position for success. And maybe to an extent that's true. But I think what's dangerous and what is sometimes unfortunate is when parents start doing that when kids are like 6, 7, 8, even 10, 11 years old, because you don't know what's going to happen to this kid, throwing all these opportunities at them. I mean, they might end up thriving, or more likely than not, and I think we've all seen it, they end up getting burned out, or they hate the sport, or they end up as bad people.
So let's go back in time. Say Zaid Valencia doesn't pull Aaron Brooks' singlet and
The singlet effect.
at that point, and he wins that match, right? And say he's against Taylor and Taylor's on the Olympic team. Is Coleman Scott the coach, or would they explored more? So we will never know.
I mean, they wouldn't have picked David Taylor because he's getting ready for the Olympics.
That's right.
I mean, I don't know. Coleman is probably the guy if it's not David Taylor.
Yeah. It's hard to say. But
see how one ref's action can change the world.
Listen.
The catalyst, right?
I take that thought into every match. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that guy that cost that kid. You just don't. You don't. So you better know what the hell you're doing.
Oh my
so
gosh.
Where does Coleman Scott go now? What's the word on the street?
I don't know. I would look at
coach, right?
I looked at Division I. You said Wisconsin?
Well, Bono's at Wisconsin. I think
He's still at Wisconsin.
Needs a new coach.
Hofstra and Buffalo, I think, are two Division I programs that are open.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about any others right now.
Yeah. No, it's
But I mean, that's a whole nother element. Like we're just thinking about Coleman Scott, as a coach, but what about his family?
Yeah.
Like North Carolina is beautiful, and his kids, I'm sure we're in school and we're doing sports. I think his family liked it there. And, I think what ultimately led them to move, I think he talks about it in an interview where he's like driving in traffic in LA, maybe for like a camp or some family trip. And they're kind of going back and forth on it. And ultimately, I think is John Smith asked him to come back, and I think matched his salary. And, I think it wasn't necessarily guaranteed because I think they have to open up the position. But I think it was, hey, you're going to be next in line to fill my spot unless something crazy happens, which hiring David Taylor as your head coach without any college wrestling coaching experience is crazy. I feel like super risky. I don't know if that risk is going to pay off or not, but
here's something to think about. How much of that decision to bring Coleman Scott was solely John Smith's, in making him feel better and more comfortable in what he knew to be his last year, and knowing and having a known quantity of or quality of the person that's going to potentially take his spot, that he can still coach the way he wants to coach and still take the program in the direction that John Smith feels it should be going. And so he brings Coleman Scott back in to meet all of his needs and the program's needs, so that he can, without guilt, leave knowing it's in the hands of a former Okie wrestler. But then the powers above went, okay, well, wait a minute, you're not going to be here anymore. We're looking, to your point, Al, 20 years down the road, what do we need to do to get us back to where we should be and to maintain that? And then I think stars align. David Taylor doesn't qualify. He's now available, and they pounce on him.
That's right.
I wonder, I think the immediate impact is, I think, again, like, who's coming over with him, if anybody, what's in general, what's his assistant, what is that staff going to look like? What's going to happen? The portal's already closed, but there's still some pretty tough guys, I think, that are in the portal right now, like Hendrickson, and then Amin's in there, Parko's in there. Schultz was, and then pulled out, I guess. He's staying at ASU. There's a good amount of guys, including a Penn State guy, Bearclaw is in there. Who's going to go to Oklahoma State? Because now it's like more eyes are going to be on the program right now. This is a big deal. This is like possibly one of the biggest news coaching hires perhaps since Cale Sanderson going to Penn State from Iowa State. So I think the immediate thing is, I think, recruiting battle. I think transfer portal battle. I think definitely a big shot in the arm to the program. I'm interested to see what do some of the athletes think about it that are currently at Oklahoma State. What is maybe the perspective of Coleman Scott? Like, I've been looking at his Twitter. He hasn't posted anything. I want to know, like, what's happening on that end. Is there any thought that maybe he stays or he pieces out? I don't know. I think if it were me, I'd be pretty burnt. I'd peace out, but I don't know. So I'm just excited to see what's going to happen with that. And I wore my Oklahoma State socks to wrestling practice today. So.
Oh no, it's been a good buzz.
You didn't wear a singlet, did you?
No, I have to. So I'm getting a little bit bigger, and I'm getting a little bit older. So I actually don't wear the singlet. I actually used to wear tights to practice too, just because that's just what I would wear in college too. But when I'm in the high school room, I don't wear those either.
Yeah.
I have to be careful. I'm an educator, so.
Brian, did you know back in the day, I think before Joe C came, they were trying to recruit Dan Gable to Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think they offered him a good amount of money, and I think he thought about
$1 million.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. Even
that'd be easily $5 million right now.
Yeah, easily $5 million. So no, this is all good stuff, man. All good stuff.
It's getting a little bit late. I just want to thank you guys for being on. I'm gonna go make dinner with the fiance right now, but I appreciate you guys coming on. Rick, you're the man. If you ever want to come on in the future, I'm gonna send you my phone number. You just let me know, man. I'm always down to talk wrestling, and maybe at some point, once we kind of get into how these rules are being implemented, I'd be down to have you on again, and we can talk about maybe your feedback. Now, guys have been reffing a little bit more and trying to implement these rules.
Well, I really appreciate that a great deal, because first of all, I really appreciate your demeanor, your coach style in the corner, the way you maintain your professionalism when approaching the table, and just in general in talking to officials, because again, we're not adversaries. We want we should anyway, want the best product, the best opportunities for kids. And last thing we want to do is take those away because of bad coaching or bad calls. So I really appreciate being on, and I think from an official's perspective, I would this actually gives me an avenue if we could get more officials to be, if not on, but listening to what you're doing, because what you're doing is great for wrestling. To educate officials, because I think as a state, I mean, we try, we do things, but I don't think we do enough as our section. I don't think we do enough to bring all the officials in to get on the same page of what those interpretations are. So anytime we have an opportunity to talk about rules and interpretations of those rules and how they should be called in situations, it just brings more uniform to it. We have less disasters on the mat in terms of bad calls. And Al, I've known you for years, my friend, and your professionalism and knowledge of the sport are just outstanding. And it's just such a pleasure to be able to talk with you and see you. So we don't get to see you guys enough, and it probably feels like too much in the middle of the season, but
Yeah.
not on my end.
I'm up in Idaho, Rick. I'm retired living up there, but still like staying connected with what's going on here. There's a lot of California guys moving up to Idaho. Rich Bailey lives up there. Remember Kyle Bergs said it was at Paradise. He's up there. There's a handful of guys from California up there. So this connectivity is really cool.
Yeah,
really
it's important. Well, Brian, thank you so much for doing this, man, and for having me on. I feel honored to be able to do it.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, and if you have any recommendations about referees that you think would be cool to have on, please just let me know, and I'd like to set that up.
Okay, absolutely. Whatever I can do.
Cool. All right, Rick.
All right, guys, have a great night.
That was episode 52 with Rick McKinney. Very thankful we were able to have him on the show to be able to talk about the rules. Very excited for the upcoming guests that we're going to have on the show. I feel like, honestly, this has just been a lot of fun, and thank you guys for your feedback. If you guys can, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify. You can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. We are also on TikTok. I know we're also on TikTok. But anyways, thank you guys for being supportive of the show, and I'll see you guys next time.